I'm a financial planner for Millionaires. Ask me anything. My day job is financial planning for high net worth clients, generally 1 million or more invested, with a lot of focus on tax saving strategies. Given Reddit's usual take on millionaires avoiding taxes, I figured you might have some questions. Note that I work in Canada, so I'm not an expert in the tax policy of any other country, though I'm somewhat familiar with the US tax system due to cross-border clients. Also, I'm not in a sales role, just pure planning. Other people deal with clients and sell them products, using my plans as a tool. I used to be in sales, see below, but I didn't deal with millionaires in that job. Are you also a millionaire? If no, why? And why should anyone listen to you? If yes, do you do this because you enjoy it, or is it the only thing you know how to do? No, I'm far from a millionaire, at least for now. People listen to me because this is my profession, and I'm familiar with a wide range of tax avoidance strategies, investment theory, and financial planning software. Much like how you'd listen to a doctor or accountant. A lot of people in the finance industry are there to pick stocks, and for evaluating them, how well has your portfolio done, is a legitimate question. But I'm not on that side of the business. The details of people's investments aren't on my radar at all. I focus on creating long-term projections, ensuring the clients don't do anything dumb. E.g., I've seen people earning 200k and spending 400k after a divorce. That doesn't end well, and stopping that bleeding is our first priority. After that, the focus is improving things with better tax strategy. Where do you go to invest? Because of regulations on trading by employees in my line of work, I'm basically required to do my investing through my employer. I use their discount brokerage arm and invest in boring index mutual funds / ETFs. What makes you stand out compared to other financial planners? Basically, why would millionaires go to you for advice, rather than another financial planner? When I was in sales, I would try to pitch myself as being detail-oriented and well-versed in complex corporate strategies, so that I could do more tax planning for business owners than most people could. It didn't work, which is why I left sales, but I do truly believe it was a skill I was much better at than most other planners. Today, it's somewhat similar, but not limited to me personally. My department has a lot of tools to do better analysis than most people do, and comparing the plans we make now to the plans I used to make, it's substantially better, about as detailed, but vastly easier for people to understand, and much faster to turn them over in bulk, which leads to us seeing more situations, and having more experience, so it's not merely an efficiency thing. We are also dedicated to quality in a way most others aren't. For example, we are doing an upgrade to our planning software, and the QA we do is amazing. The vendor we get the software from, we are testing it in more depth than they do, and this is an old respected firm, not a fly-by-night operation, whereas most of our competitors seem to just take their numbers as gospel and not test them. That sort of focus on quality will show up elsewhere too. We have an accountant and a planner working together on every plan, with both of us covering all aspects of the work, so that there's always two sets of eyes on the end result. It sounds like some other firms work that way, but most aren't so religious. I've actually been pleasantly surprised by my firm since I started. To be honest, I knew we were well respected in the market, but it's nice to be on the inside seeing why. There's a couple annoyances, but overall my team is top notch, and my firm is quite good. How does one become a financial planner? Everyone's a bit different, but usually you get a degree in something related to finance, go work in low-level sales jobs for a while, and get some credentials related to the job. For me, I got an economics degree, picked up my Canadian securities course, the basic one that lets you get licensed, and chartered financial analyst exams, which aren't really related to my current job, but are famously hard, so passing them impressed people. Worked a year and a half at a non-financial call center, did 3 years in commission sales, see the IamA in my op, and then wound up at my current firm, 2 years and counting. A lot of people come up through bank branches. If you're going for the sales route, it's comparatively easy to get in, because sales skills are tough to train. Instead, everyone just uses hire a bunch of people, see who can actually sell well strategy, which means a fair bit of churn. Getting in is easy, and it's all commission based, so success pays very well. There were 3 guys at my last office making north of $1 million a year, and there was only about 30 of us in the office. My current role is non-sales though, which is harder to find. There's a lot of failed salesmen in the world. Usually if you're a geek who can't sell, you wind up working for a successful salesman who wants a numbers guy. My current department is sort of like that, but centralized into a department that provides that service to our whole advisor network nationwide. What amount of money should one have in savings or earning annually before one should start considering tax havens? That depends quite a lot on what you mean by tax havens. There's a lot of perfectly normal tax avoidance strategies that you can use even as a burger flipper. Our tax sheltered accounts, the RRSP and TFSA, equivalent to American 401k and Roth IRA accounts broadly speaking, are flexible and accessible, and should be used widely. Some advanced strategies require a fair bit of money to make sense. The biggest tax avoidance strategy for rich people is life insurance, but that only makes sense when you have large piles of money over and above what you can invest in your RRSP/TFSA. It's rare to see that among anyone making less than 100k a year, and it doesn't get common until you're up around a doctor's income. If you mean moving the money to a secret trust in Grand Cayman so that you can avoid paying taxes on it, never. This is illegal basically everywhere, and in the modern era it's almost impossible to hide. People in developing countries move their money offshore for fear of government confiscation, and the few people in developed countries who do it are usually doing it for reasons like avoiding public disclosure of their financial affairs when their will is probated. Some are just morons who think they can cheat, I suppose, but I've never seen it. I think this meme is mostly from an era before computers, when you might have been able to get away with it. Don't know how no one has asked you this yet, but what are some tax avoidance strategies you can recommend? And where can one learn more about these strategies? Even for our other wealthy clients, the go-tos are frequently the stuff everyone knows about. The typical tax-advantaged savings accounts are really good, and unless you're saving in Canada north of 30k a year, you'll probably never fill them up, so you never really need anything else. After that, there's 2 basic categories. There's the ones that shave percentage points off a tax here or there, and there's life insurance. Percentage shaving moves are things like an 80-year-old making their investments jointly owned by their kids to avoid probate fees. 1.5% on death in my province, so you save 15k for your kids. If you've got $1 million account, incorporated business owners trying to decide whether to pay salary or dividends, one will usually be slightly better than the other, and so on. The best source for the curious redditor is probably your country's r/personal finance sub. If you want to do it for real, find a competent local planner. I have a Roth IRA type retirement plan that is essentially an S&P 500 ETF. Whatever the S&P does, so does my account. I've thought about diversifying, but I've also heard that ETFs are outperforming most actively managed funds and or mutual funds right now. Your thoughts? Disclaimer, any advice I give here is super generic, and you'll want to consider your own personal situation before following it. r/personal finance is an excellent resource for more tailored advice. There's a couple ways to diversify. In terms of ETF versus active management, the research is generally pro-ETF. Active management does outperform indexing before fees, but the fees are more expensive than the performance justifies. When those fees are used to buy financial advice that has value to you, they can be worth it, but from a pure rate of return perspective, the ETF will probably do a bit better in the long run. The difference is pretty small if you stick to active funds with no embedded advice fees though, so it's not a huge problem if you add some active funds. There's also diversification of what you invest in. If you're purely in a S&P ETF, you're missing out on a lot of other investment choices. The S&P is something like half of the global stock market, but there's a lot of big companies in the other half that you might want to be invested in. Toyota and Samsung and Shell and IamA are all non-American. Consider adding a global equity fund alongside your American equity fund to get some exposure to them. You can also consider bonds, emerging market stocks, and or small cap stocks, but that depends more on your risk tolerance than global equity funds would. What's a good amount of money to invest to start earning and turning over a profit? Whatever you have. This wasn't always true. but $100 is more than enough to open an investment account these days, and you don't even pay many fees in the process. Profits are proportional to the amount invested, so that $100 won't take you far, but it's better to have it in than out. My usual rule of thumb is to invest 10% of your pay and live like someone who earns 10% less than you lives, unless you're genuinely extremely poor or heavily in debt. A solid pension plan, like government employees have, means you can get away with less. Not 0, but 5% would be reasonable. How accurate would you say books like The Millionaire Next Door are? What I mean is, what percentage of your clients are regular Joes who worked a somewhat normal job? Within this context, a normal job could be a professional, but say less than $200k a year in earnings, and save their money over the long haul. And what percentage are rich effers who were born rich and most of their wealth came, in one form or another, from mommy and daddy? I guess there's a third group, self-made new money, like entrepreneurs or high-earning doctors, lawyers, C-suite, etc. Pretty accurate. These numbers are inherently approximate. We get a snapshot, not a whole life story, but if I had to guess, I'd say 10% of them are mostly inherited. 50% are mostly self-earned with incomes less than $200k, and 40% are mostly self-earned with incomes over $200k. The bulk of our clients are 50 to 75 years old, so you've got time to accumulate a lot. If you make $120k and save a decent chunk of it, if you save $18k a year in today's dollars and earn 4% more than inflation, you've got $1 million within 30 years. That said, remember how wealth transfers down between generations. I know a lot of children of high-income parents socially, and only one has gotten any substantial parental cash. If I were to do financial plans for any of them, they'd all show up to me as people who made it themselves. But they all got a high-quality education, a strong understanding that they could succeed in their careers, and were expected to. Contacts and high-paying jobs who can give career advice and secure fallback plans if they screwed up. This is why I used self-earned above and not self-made. Most of them probably grew up in prosperous households. I'm not going to pretend they're all the kids of a forklift driver, but the money they have is mostly money they earned from their own labor. I've seen a lot of plans where someone is expecting to inherit $1 million, but they've already got $3 million saved from their own careers. What is the worst, most emotionally painful part of your job? Such as when your clients spend frivolous amounts of money on one-time use possessions, or a European car they might drive once every 2 months, but still demand their help gets it washed/waxed every day. Yeah, more or less. Some people have no concept of what they spend, and do crazy things. For example, one file I was working on recently was a business owner couple, whose debt and spending levels were just insane. They were trying to retire at age 60 and selling the business for over $2 million, but all that money would be gone in 4 years just from paying their living expenses, taxes, and debt payments. They had 5 properties: house, cottage, vacant lot next to the cottage that I think they wanted to build another cottage on, a timeshare, and a winter place in the southern US. Plus what I think may have been 2 more personal use properties buried in the corporation. They had something like 4 mortgages on these 5 properties, totaling a couple $1 million, which they had no plans to repay anytime soon. Their interest rates on this debt were higher than their assumed investment growth rates, since they were super conservative investors, too, so they'd have been better off to just clear out their accounts and pay off all those debts. On top of this, they had some really extravagant goals, like buying an apartment block to turn into a group home for their disabled daughter and her friends, which they'd charge some rent on, but not nearly enough to pay for everything. I didn't need to look them in the eye here, but I still had to build a scenario for them where they sold 4 properties and repaid 4 mortgages all before the end of the year, and then cut their living expenses by a third thereafter. But that lets them have enough money to make it to age 90, instead of going into irreparable debt at 70 and dying several $1 million in the hole. They'd obviously been using debt to finance a lifestyle they couldn't maintain, and they didn't even realize it. My colleague who was face to face with them tried to warn them that they were in a bad position, and they were arguing with him, saying they'd be fine. I really want to know what's going to happen there, because those 2 needed a Chuck Norris-sized kick in the butt. That level of irresponsibility really bugs me. I'm picking there's many different ways they've acquired their money, like property, shares, inheritance, etc. But are there any methods that are more common than others across all your clients? Good jobs. Inheritance is pretty rare as a primary source of funds, and earning profits on investments works best when you already have money in the bank. Much more common is being a doctor or a lawyer or a small business owner. Do you set aside a certain percentage of money for the client to save, or do anything they want with? If so, what is it, and how do you decide what it is? Other people do the client-facing part of the job these days, not me. I sit in an office and create the plans for others to present. But the usual process there is that we'll have a discussion with the clients about their goals, see what it is they want, how they've been living their lives so far, and how we might be able to adjust it. In a lot of cases, at least, with our current clients, they're already on track for success, so nothing really needs to change. We give them a few tips to improve how they do things, but we don't need to do anything with personal budgeting. What they've already done is fine. However, there's some clients who aren't okay, and whose current path leads down the road to ruin. In those cases, it's generally a discussion of we ran the numbers, and you're in trouble. Here's a couple options we looked at for how to fix it. Don't buy that cottage. Spend less. Work a few extra years. Whatever. How do you want to proceed? The clients are adults, and realistically we can give them advice, but we can't make them listen to it. So any solution to a problem needs to get buy-in from the clients in order to actually happen for real. On the flip side, if clients are super well off, we'll usually show them some alternatives where they spend more. Typically, this is phrased as here's how much wiggle room you have to pay for unexpected expenses, because we don't want to encourage them to be frivolous. Sometimes it's even a sales tool. You can afford to spend an extra $50,000 a year, and you said you wanted to leave everything to your kids. So how about taking half of that and spending it on a whole life insurance policy? TLDR, it really depends on client circumstances. What is the most frequent question that you get from your clients, and how have you answered them? I'm not client-facing these days, so that's a bit rusty. But the biggest categories are probably so what do I do? From new investors, and will I be okay? From people with a bit more of a plan. The ones who don't have a plan want one, and the ones who do have a plan want to know if it's any good. Naturally, there's no broad answer there. Beyond that, the questions are usually technical detail, current events. So, what's with this rule that came down in the budget this year, or other such hard to generalize stuff? What would be your to-do list for someone winning a large lottery? Get a very clear understanding of just how much money you have, and what you can do with it. Reserve some amount of that for spending frivolously, and some for giving to people, but put limits on both. If you're going to do something like quitting your job, make sure you've got enough to live on afterwards. Keep in mind that a lot of one-time expenses have ongoing costs. You can afford $1 million for a dream home, but can you afford the $30,000 a year of extra property taxes and maintenance that it'll cost you? Invest at last somewhat cautiously, and use only large and trustworthy institutions. Also, be on the lookout for scammers, beggars, and fools of all sorts. It's not pretty, but anecdotally it happens all the time, including friends and family. Seriously consider socking some of that money away in a format that's locked in for the long term. Annuities, perhaps. Depends how much you win, because the return on investment for those is kind of terrible, but sometimes the security matters more than the ROI. Also, for a big enough win, starting a charity can be a pretty good approach.